All right, welcome back for another deep dive. We usually tackle pretty complex stuff, but today's topic might seem straightforward at first glance. We're talking about immigration to Canada,
Canada,
the land of opportunity, right?
the Great White North.
Exactly. Safe, beautiful, free healthcare. It's like the dream destination for so many people around the world.
Absolutely, that's the image, isn't it? The Canadian dream.
But here's where things get interesting. We've got some research suggesting that a significant chunk of immigrants actually end up leaving Canada. And we're not talking about anecdotal stories here. We're looking at hard data.
Yeah, we've got a pretty diverse mix of sources for this deep dive. We'll be looking at a Statistics Canada study to get that broad overview, and then we'll dig into a CTV News article that really unpacks those findings in a more digestible way.
Okay, so we've got the numbers, we've got the news analysis, but then we wanted to go deeper, get into the why behind these departures.
Exactly. So we're also bringing in a report called The Leaky Bucket by the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. They do some really insightful work focusing on immigrant integration and retention.
And to make things even more interesting, we've got a couple of YouTube videos with very different takes on this whole situation.
Those should add some real-world perspective.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unravel this mystery. Why are people leaving this supposed paradise? What are the factors at play? Is it all about economics? Or are there deeper cultural or social issues contributing to this trend?
It's a puzzle for sure.
It is. And we want you, the listener, to be a part of this exploration. What surprises you as we go along? Have you seen anything similar in your own community or maybe even in your own life? Hit us up on social media. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
All right, so let's jump into the data. The Statistics Canada study found that over 15% of immigrants who landed in Canada between 1982 and 2017 had left within 20 years. That's not exactly a small number.
Wow, 15%. That's a significant portion of newcomers. It's not like just a few people here and there deciding to move on, so clearly something's going on. But it gets even more intriguing when you look at the timing of these departures. The study found that emigration peaks between 3 and 7 years after arrival. There's a pattern there.
That's a really interesting point. It's not just random departures happening throughout their time in Canada. There seems to be a critical period where immigrants are more likely to make the decision to leave. And here's something that really surprised me. The CTV News article highlights that these immigration rates have remained relatively consistent over time, regardless of economic cycles. So it's not like people just leaving when the economy's bad and staying when things are good. There's something more to it.
That's fascinating. So if it's not just about the economy, then what is it about those crucial first few years that makes or breaks it for people? What are those make or break moments? What are those experiences that are pushing people away? I think this is where those YouTube videos can provide some valuable insights. They give us those street-level perspectives that you don't always get from statistics and news articles.
Absolutely. We've got Igor Riltsev, who's actually worried about the impact of people leaving Canada. He brings up some interesting economic arguments.
Yeah, he's coming at it from a very different angle.
Right. And then we have Canada couple who share their own experiences and observations about why some immigrants struggle to settle in. They offer a much more personal perspective.
So let's start with Riltsev. He argues that fewer immigrants could actually hurt the Canadian economy. Less demand for housing, fewer people to fill jobs. He's essentially saying that declining immigration could lead to slower economic growth.
It's a counterintuitive argument, isn't it? We often hear about the need for more immigrants to boost the economy, but he's suggesting that losing immigrants could also have negative consequences.
Yeah, and he uses this example of building a skyscraper in Toronto. Imagine you're a developer, and rents are dropping, population growth is flatlining, and the government might be changing policies. Would you want to sink millions into that project? Probably not. And that's his point. Declining immigration could create uncertainty and make investors hesitant to put their money into Canada.
It's definitely a different way of looking at things.
Yeah.
He's forcing us to think about the long-term consequences of immigration, not just the immediate impacts.
Right. And then we have the Canada couple. They paint a very different picture. They talk about the challenges of finding jobs that match your qualifications, dealing with the harsh Canadian winters, feeling homesick, financial stress, all the things that can make immigrating to a new country really tough, even a country as welcoming as Canada.
They really highlight that it's not always easy to adjust to a new life in a new place. They talk about the culture shock, the language barriers, the feeling of being an outsider, things that can wear you down over time.
Absolutely. And they even touch on healthcare. It's free in Canada, but it's not perfect.
Oh.
Wait times, access to specialists, those things can be frustrating, especially when you're used to a different system. They're not saying it's bad, but they're pointing out that it's not always the utopia that people imagine.
It's about managing expectations, right?
Yeah.
Canada has a lot to offer, but it's not a perfect paradise. And I think these personal stories are so important because they humanize the data.
Hmm.
We're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about real people who are trying to build a life for themselves and facing very real challenges. It reminds us that there are human stories behind these statistics.
Right, and those stories often get lost in the big picture. But let's bring in that third perspective. The Institute for Canadian Citizenship, the ICC. They've got this report called the Leaky Bucket, which, as the title suggests, isn't exactly painting a rosy picture of immigrant retention in Canada.
Yeah, their report actually confirms a lot of what we've been seeing in the other sources. More immigrants are leaving Canada, and there's a real sense of urgency to address this issue. They argue that it's not just about attracting immigrants, it's about making sure they stay and thrive.
Okay, so what are their key findings? What's making this bucket leak?
One of their most striking findings is that economic immigrants and francophones, two groups that Canada actually prioritizes for immigration, are the least likely to stay long-term, which is kind of a paradox when you think about it.
It is. You'd think people coming for economic opportunity would be more likely to stick around if they're finding success. And Canada's been putting a lot of effort into attracting more French speakers outside of Quebec.
Exactly. So the question is, why are these groups, who are supposedly highly desirable for Canada, choosing to leave? What's going wrong?
It seems like we're missing something. Like there's a disconnect between our immigration goals and the reality on the ground.
And the ICC argues that it's not enough to simply open the doors and say, welcome to Canada. Daniel Bernhard, their CEO, puts it really well in their advocacy video. He says, and I'm quoting here, "Immigration is not just a manifestation of our generosity, it is a manifestation of our ambition. A truly welcoming society does more than just open its doors. It offers hospitality, friendship, and fulfillment."
That's a powerful statement. It's not just about letting people in, it's about creating a society where they feel truly welcome, supported, and valued.
And that requires more than just policies and programs. It requires a shift in mindset, a genuine effort to create a sense of belonging for newcomers.
It's about building a community, not just a country. And I think that's a key takeaway from this first part of our deep dive. Immigration is complex, it's multifaceted, and it requires us to look beyond the surface. It's not just about numbers and economic indicators, it's about people, their stories, and their experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's about acknowledging that Canada, while a welcoming country, still has work to do to truly live up to its reputation as a land of opportunity for everyone. So we've talked about these broad trends, these big numbers, but the Statistics Canada study actually dug a little deeper. They found some pretty interesting correlations between things like country of birth, having kids, age at arrival, and how likely someone is to stay in Canada. For example, immigrants from certain countries were less likely to pack their bags and leave. Folks from the Philippines, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, or Jamaica, for instance, had lower emigration rates. Less than 10% of them left within 20 years.
That's interesting, less than 10%. What's going on in those communities? Are there stronger support networks, shared cultural values that help them feel more connected? It makes you wonder what factors are contributing to that sense of belonging.
Yeah, and it really highlights the importance of community, especially when you're navigating a new country and culture. Having that support system can make a huge difference. And speaking of community, the study also found that immigrants who had kids in Canada were more likely to stay put. Makes you think about putting down roots, right?
It's not just about you anymore, it's about the future you're creating for your family. But on the flip side, older immigrants, those who came to Canada at age 65 or older, were more likely to head back to their home countries.
You can imagine wanting to be closer to family and friends as you get older, maybe missing those familiar comforts of home, and adapting to a whole new life at that stage can be challenging, to say the least.
Definitely. It's a lot to ask. It really highlights how these stay or go decisions aren't always driven by economics or even broad policies. It's often deeply personal, tied to where you are in life, what your priorities are.
Exactly. And it brings up some tricky questions, like should Canada actually consider someone's likelihood of staying when evaluating immigration applications? Is that even fair?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, some people might argue that prioritizing those who are more likely to stay would create a more stable society and economy. But how do you even measure that likelihood of staying? And is it ethical to potentially shut out people who might thrive in Canada if given the chance?
It gets complicated quickly. And the ICC, the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, actually pushes back against that kind of selection process. They argue for more targeted and flexible retention strategies, recognizing that Canada's huge and diverse, and what works in one place might not work in another.
One size doesn't fit all, right? So what are some of those specific strategies? What are we doing beyond the basics like language classes and job help to make newcomers feel truly welcome?
The ICC suggests thinking holistically. How do we help newcomers feel like they belong? How do we create opportunities for them to connect with others, use their skills, contribute to their communities? It's about moving beyond just surviving to thriving.
I like that. It's about feeling valued, like you're a part of something bigger. And that brings us back to those Francophone immigrants we talked about earlier. They're leaving at higher rates, often within those first couple of years. And the ICC suggests it's because they struggle to find that sense of belonging outside of Quebec.
It's that critical mass issue, right? In many parts of Canada, there just aren't enough French speakers to create that sense of community, that ease of navigating daily life in your language.
It's harder to feel at home when you're constantly having to switch languages to explain yourself, to feel like you're on the outside.
Precisely. And Canada's been trying to attract more francophones outside of Quebec for years. But maybe it's time to reevaluate the strategy. Are we providing the right support? Are communities doing enough to create welcoming environments? Are we just talking about bilingualism, or are we actually
Yeah.
living it?
It's easy to talk the talk, but walking the walk is a different story. And it makes you wonder, are there other groups facing similar challenges that we're not even aware of? The data gives us a broad overview, but there are so many individual stories within those numbers.
Absolutely. Are we doing enough to address the unique needs of immigrants from different backgrounds, with different languages, different skills, different dreams? Are our settlement services truly accessible and effective? Are we acknowledging potential biases, even unconscious ones, that might be holding people back?
Those are some tough questions, and they're questions for everyone, not just policymakers. We all have a role to play in making Canada a truly welcoming place. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to that leaky bucket metaphor. It frames immigration as a problem, something that needs fixing. But what if we looked at it from a different angle? What if some people choose to leave because they've actually achieved their goals in Canada?
Interesting. You're thinking they've gained experience, education, connections, and now they're moving on to new opportunities, maybe even taking those skills and knowledge back to their home countries.
Exactly. It shifts the narrative from failure to retain to successful Launchpad Canada as a stepping stone, a place to gain valuable experience and then contribute to the world in different ways.
I like that reframing. It reminds us that immigration is a complex, multi-directional flow of people, ideas, and experiences. It's not just about who stays, but about the impact those who lead have on the world.
It's about recognizing that people's lives and goals evolve, and sometimes that means moving on, even from a place as wonderful as Canada. And that's okay.
It's about embracing the dynamism of immigration and recognizing that Canada can benefit from those who stay and those who leave. It's a win-win.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. We've gone from Statistics Canada to YouTube, from economic arguments to personal stories, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, so many nuances to unpack.
Absolutely. And we want you, the listener, to be a part of this ongoing conversation. What resonated with you today? What surprised you? What questions are you left with? Because ultimately, the future of immigration in Canada is something we all need to be thinking about and engaging with.
So keep learning, keep questioning, keep those conversations going. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of immigration in Canada. Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. Stats Canada, news articles, those YouTube videos, the ICC's report. It's been a real whirlwind.
It has. A real deep dive, like you said.
I don't know about you, but my head is spinning just a little bit.
I hear you. It's a lot to process.
But it's been so eye-opening. I mean, I always knew immigration was a big topic, but I guess I never really thought about it from all these different angles.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the headlines, the political debates, the sound bites. But there's so much more to it than that.
Absolutely. And like you said earlier, maybe that leaky bucket metaphor isn't always the best way to look at things. Maybe we need to shift our perspective a bit.
Right. Instead of just focusing on who's leaving, what if we celebrated the fact that Canada can be this incredible launch pad for global talent?
I love that idea. So instead of failure to retain, it's successful launchpad.
Yeah.
People come here, they learn, they grow, they build connections, and then they take all that and make a difference in the world, maybe even bringing those skills and knowledge back to Canada in different ways.
Exactly. It's not a zero-sum game. Canada can benefit from those who stay and those who move on. It's about contributing to a more connected and prosperous world.
It's about recognizing that people's lives and goals evolve, And sometimes that means moving on, even from a place as amazing as Canada. And that's okay.
More than okay. It's part of what makes the world interesting, right? This constant flow of people and ideas.
Absolutely. So, listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a challenge. Given everything we've talked about today, the data, the personal stories, those expert opinions, what do you think Canada should do to make immigration work better, both for the people coming here and for the country as a whole?
It's a big question.
It is. Should we rethink our settlement services? Invest more in language training and job placement? Focus on creating more inclusive and welcoming communities? Or maybe it's even bigger than that. Maybe it's about changing our whole mindset.
Shifting from seeing immigrants as just workers to seeing them as individuals with so much to offer. Their talents, their cultures, their unique perspectives.
It's about fostering that sense of belonging, that feeling that everyone has a stake in Canada's future, no matter where they were born or how long they plan to stay.
It's a conversation we all need to be having.
And it starts with each of us. So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of immigration in Canada.